So Hyperlight Drifter, this game seems like it was basically made for me. But that's also why I'm disappointed with it. And granted, I say disappointed, I would still give this game like an 8 out of 10. I definitely enjoyed it, but I can see so many reasons it should have been a 10 out of 10. Like, this game is so close to my idea of what would be a perfect game for me that, like, everything wrong with it is really sad. Because, first of all, aesthetically, it's perfect. Like, the graphical style is beautiful. I fucking love the color choices everywhere. It's got these very, like, ethereal purples and blues and greens, and, like, it's all very cool colored. Lots of pink in there, which I'm a big fan of. You know, the water and the water level is fucking gorgeous. The trees and the trees level are fucking gorgeous. It's just a fucking beautiful game to look at. And that I cannot fault it with at all. The pixel art is fantastic. The animations look really good and are super, like, chunky and satisfying. Like, every time you swing your sword, it feels fucking cool. Every time you hit an enemy, there's a perfect amount of, like, ka-chok, you know? The game feel is totally on point. The art design is totally on point. The town looks really cool. The fucking giant Evangelion Unit 01 fused with the robots from Nausicaa things are really cool. And the fact that, like, you'll be walking through the skeletons of them at parts. The story, I don't understand in the slightest. I don't know any of what was going on in the game. It never made sense to me. I think if you 100% it, there might be more of an explanation, but frankly, I was not paying attention to the cutscenes or even outright skipping them, so, like, there's no way I would have grasped the whole story. But I'm glad that this game really puts the story in the backseat. There is no dialogue or text in this game, unless it's to explain something to you, and even then, I don't think there's any text in the whole game. Everything's explained with images, which is fucking perfect. I want every video game to be that, because that's how I play games. I don't come to games for the story. Like, and it's got to do with the way that games work, where, like, the way I want to consume a story is kind of all at once. Like, if I'm going to have to watch and listen to something, I want it to be holding my full attention. And, like, let's say a cutscene plays. If I'm going to watch a cutscene, I got to have the audio and video on. But then you go back into the game, and there might be hours between the next cutscene. And during those hours, you're performing a repetitive task and listening to the same song on loop, or no song. And, like, I can't do that. Like, I can't just, you know, repeat a repetitive task with nothing else going on in the background, like no podcasts or music. And then if a cutscene starts up, I have to now stop my podcast or my music and go watch the cutscene, and I just cannot be asked. You know, it's too much. It's just not the way I like to consume a story. So I would prefer games that either just have no story or a skippable story, or it's incidental. Not to say that I'm totally opposed to playing a game for the story, but, like, I'd have to give it my full attention. And there's a good reason I haven't played a lot of games like that lately, because the idea of having to commit myself to just consuming a game for 40 hours or whatever is, like, too much for me. I like games that are short, to the point, action-centric, no real story. Hyperlight Drifter, perfect for me. I could just look at the pictures and I got it, you know? The game does an amazing job of conveyance with its environments and with the, like, symbols it uses, with characters who will explain to you their backstory in just 3 pictures. It's just pictures, and there's only 3. You know, nothing's too long, nothing's hand-holding. Even the way you discover secrets in the game is mostly just by intuitiveness. Like, if you see something that looks a little off, hit it with your sword and see what happens. You know, if you see that it looks like there's a little bit of gravel next to a wall that looks kind of like it's leading you that way, go check it out, you know, and it's pretty easy to figure out where all the secrets are in the game. Granted, there were a couple of methods that I didn't figure out till much later, and we'll get into that as this goes on. But for the most part, I love the game design. I love the theory of it. So the way this game works, it's also very non-linear, which is pretty cool in itself. Because the game drops you off in a city at the start, and you can go north, south, east, and west. But if you go south, you won't be able to go to the southernmost place until you beat the other 3. Now, what I did was I went to the west path first. And I heard not too long after the first video was posted, which was before I'd gone to the other places, someone said, "Oh man, Digi went to the hardest area first." And they were not wrong. However, I didn't think it was that hard. And this was where the game started to break apart, was after I beat that area, which I hadn't actually beat the boss. I made it all the way to the boss of the first area in probably like 2 hours. Like I was exploring everything I could along the way. I was looking through every nook and cranny, like fighting all these enemies, learning all the mechanics, picking up new fucking, skills and shit, though I didn't learn how to use the skill points until a little bit later. But I basically, plowed through this whole area and was having a great time. If you saw me playing the game, if you watched the Digi and May do videos, the first one, there's a part where I die like probably almost 20 times trying to do one thing. That is by far the hardest time I had playing this game. Like that was, well, okay, that's not entirely true. That was not the hardest challenge in the game, but it was because I was talking and playing at the same time, and I was doing something that was like, I was on low health, but I was like stubbornly trying to do it anyways. Most of the game was not nearly that effortful. Most of it I was just kind of skating through, and it wasn't that big a deal. The only thing in the game, like combat-wise, that was super difficult is the boss of that area. And so I make it all the way to this boss, and he's like a Dark Souls boss. Like, he's got that kind of moveset. He's very pattern-based, but it's like a very fast, brutal, like if you don't master the pattern, you're fucked. You cannot fuck up in this fight, or else you will get killed. So, that was a really hard boss, and I get up against it, and I'm like, fuck, man, this is a real challenge. Like, I'm totally into this. But then I was like, well, I tried it a bunch of times, and then I went, okay, I don't think I'm strong enough for this yet. I'm going to go to a different area, especially because at this point I had read that I went to the hardest one first. So then I go up to the northern area, and I'm kind of blowing through it, but like there are some harder enemies. Like I wouldn't say that the base level is much harder going to the west than it is going north or east. Maybe a bit, because there's just more combat encounters, but like I wouldn't say it's like dramatically harder. But then I get to the boss of the northern area, and I just mop the floor with him, like maybe 4 or 5 tries, and I was like, oh, like, and I'd gotten pretty far on the first try, and I was like, oh, that was way easier than the other guy, maybe this guy was supposed to be the first boss. So I collect some of the stuff in that area, as much as I can find offhand, and then I go back and I go to the eastern area. And I'm cleaning my way through there, having a pretty good time. Get to the boss, first try. Just destroy him. He's not even hard. Like, not even slightly hard. And I'm like, oh, that was the boss? Like, this game is supposed to be hard. Like, this game is thought of as hard. But the funny thing about it is that the game can be hard, but it's not punishing at all. It just restarts you at the start of a room after you die. Which in my mind means that every challenge could really have been as hard as they wanted, because it does so little to punish you. Like, what usually frustrates people out of playing Dark Souls is that you lose a lot of progress when you die. You have to run all the way back to the boss. You have to, you can lose your souls if you die too many times. But once you learn those games, what you realize is that A, making it to the boss every time will make you learn the game better. And B, you don't lose your collectibles. And so you can always fuck off from a boss and go collect a bunch of shit and then get crazy overpowered. Like in Dark Souls, you can get like ludicrously OP just by raising your strength and health stats. You know, you can go grind, and as long as you have a long enough HP bar and you reasonably know how to dodge, you can stomp through a Souls game, you know, especially if you get your weapon upgraded. What's cool about Hyper Light Drifter is that they don't really ever make it easier. Like, you get the only upgrades you can get is you can gain new attacks. So like you have one thing that like makes it so you can dodge faster. There's one thing that makes it so, well, not dodge faster, but like more, you can dodge more times in a row. You've got a bunch of attacks with your sword that you can gain, and you can gain more health packs. You cannot gain more health. You can only gain more health packs. And you can only gain 2 extra, so you have 5 total. Which, if you can't find any health packs around, does not help you at all, you know? And you can upgrade your guns, but, like, barely. So, you can't really raise your base strength that much. For the most part, you're doing the same exact amount of damage throughout the whole game. You still have to dodge, you still have to learn your way around. It's just how difficult are the challenges. And I feel like in order to make it so you could go on whatever path you want first, all the challenges are not that extreme. And, you know, it's weird that the westernmost boss is so much harder than the other two. And because where it really got sad was after beating the bosses of the 3 areas and getting enough, like, shit to unlock the 4th one, I go to the 4th area and it's no harder. In fact, I beat the boss on my first try, and I was like, what the fuck? Why was this boss even easier than the super hard one? Like he should have been the hardest one, because he's the last. You have to fight him last. But I didn't even think that zone was much harder. Like, it had more enemy encounters that were in denser pockets, but, like, it was not dramatically harder than the other 3 areas. And there was a real opportunity to make it that way because, again, there's so little punishment for dying that I would gladly throw myself into a scenario over and over and over again until I get it right. So, you know, beating the 4 bosses and collecting 4 of the collectibles in the game are as follows. You can gather these little chips that, like, work as currency, and that's how you buy upgrades. And then you collect 8 of these little triangle-shaped pieces in each level. And once you have 3, you can fight the boss. Once you have 4, it opens up, like, certain doors around the levels to get to other secret shit. And once you have all 8, you can go into, like, a challenge area in that map. And there's also keys that you can gain, which, like, give you access to other rooms and shit. So I, of course, wanted to 100% this game because the game's relatively short, it's fun to play, I like it, and I like exploring. I'm big into exploration games. I like backtracking and going through areas more than once. However, in this game, it quickly got a little bit ridiculous. Because you'll play through an area once, and there's almost no chance you're going to find everything. I mean, there's some stuff you outright won't be able to get to because you haven't opened the right doors yet. But there's also just, like, times where, you know, it's a really difficult thing to find, and you're probably not going to notice it your first way through. Especially because you might not be realizing how much secret shit there is in the game. So, basically, I played through all the levels all the way through at least twice. And oftentimes I would circle back through a room over and over again, trying to find if it had any secret shit. I scoured this whole game for hours. Like, I would say I spent significantly more time searching for secret shit than I had spent actually just beating the 4 levels in the first place. And, you know, once you've beaten the bosses, there's no, like, huge challenge. It's really just, like, the enemies kind of just become frustratingly in the way. Like, you're going back through an area and you're like, okay, I just want to explore. I just want to find the secrets. Can all you guys stop spawning, you know? And granted, the game doesn't, like, respawn every time you go through an area, but if you stop at a health station, it'll respawn enemies. And if you, or teleport And if you've like like restarted the game or like left an area for a significant amount of time, enemies will start coming back. So it's not a total pain in the ass, but I did get sick of certain enemy encounters when I'm like scouring the map, because again, you might go all the way through and you've still got one piece you haven't found, and it's like, well, I don't know where it is, so I have to scour through the entire map again. And when you get to that third time of scouring a map, that's when you get sick of it. When you're like, good lord, I can't believe I'm still looking for this fucking last piece. Now, in the western area, I did get all 8 pieces, and I opened up the secret area, and there was a challenge that I almost gave up on, where you have to, like, rapid dash across all these spikes, and it was really fucking tough. That was the hardest challenge I actually overcame in the game, which was just like this insane amount of rapid dashing, but eventually I mastered it, and I got a like an extra armor set, basically, which I couldn't tell. Like there's a whole bunch of sword and like you can get a whole bunch of different swords off of fallen corpses, but the ones I gathered didn't seem to be any stronger or weaker. It was just aesthetic differences, which are so minor that it's like it's just a different color for your sword. And some of them are like the same color with like a different colored handle, I guess. I don't know. If any of them were actually stronger, I didn't notice. It didn't seem that way of the ones I had gathered. Because that one was like in a super secret area, so I would think if there was going to be a strong one, it would be that one. And I think I did that for a couple of areas, and I'd gotten all the keys, and then like the last thing was there's like these tomes that you can look at that'll like there's an obvious final door in the game that you need to scan all this data for. At some point, I just gave up. Like, it got to a point where I had like 98% of all the shit in the game, and I'm looking at it, and like once you've beaten the 4 bosses, it gives you the final boss room, and I'd already fought the final boss a couple of times. Like, I threw myself up against him a couple times, and I'd lost, and I went, okay, well, I want to keep playing. Like, if this is the final boss, they've obviously left me this opportunity to go check out the rest of the world, so I want to go do that. So that's why I was exploring for so long. And I also wasn't sure if this was going to be like a 1-form final boss or if it was going to be multiple forms. Like, it seemed pretty hard, and I was like, if this is going to be a multi-phase thing, then I need to be like ready to commit time to it. So, after getting like 98% of the collectibles, I finally was like, all right, I'm fed up with this game. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to scour the earth a 3rd time, so let me go fight the final boss. And I beat it on like the 3rd try. It was not even that hard. I would say the final boss wasn't even as hard as the fucking Western boss. So just overall, the game left me feeling not challenged enough. It felt like it had every reason to be much harder and to go way all out on the boss battles. In fact, I think it probably should have had like mini bosses and stuff, like, because it's a very simple game. It's just dodge and slash combat. Like, there's not that much stuff you can do with just like enemy encounters, and like a lot of the times the way they escalate difficulty is just to mob you with enemies, but it's pretty easy to leash enemies around and to like, just navigate your way around a scene or just brute force it. Like, there's a lot of combat encounters that I just brute forced by like dashing around and slashing randomly. Like, nothing was so difficult that I had to be tactical except for that one boss and the final boss. Like, those are the only moments in the game where I could not possibly have gotten by without playing very carefully. And they were the most fun encounters. So it was like, why isn't there more of this? More like really interesting patterns to attacks, more like boss fights that really, force you to think and react quickly. And even those ones, like, they were not complicated. They only had like a couple of attacks. So it just felt like this game's biggest thing, like the biggest thing they went for was making as many secrets as possible. Like, making it this really dense world with tons of shit in it for you to find. And I like that a lot, but there's just a little bit too much, and too much of it is so hard to find that you end up going through a level 5 times, and nothing changes about the level enough to make that worth it. you know? Like, they could have, there's a lot they could have done. They could have done things like maybe have the level change after you kill the boss, and that would make it interesting to explore again, because you want to know what's going to be there the second time. Like, sort of like how in Mega Man X, like, depending on what order you kill the bosses in, these stages will change. Like, and that encourages you to just play through the game multiple times, you know, to see the stages in multiple ways. They could have done that here. I mean, it would have been hard because it's like an indie game, and like I understand that there's only so much they can do with the already beautiful art assets. Like, they'd have to create an entire new set of assets for that level, but it would make the game better, and like whenever someone says like, well, it's an indie game, like, what do you expect? I say, well, I expect it to be a less good game because not as many people worked on it and it didn't have as much money put into it. So yeah, they can't make as good of a product, it's just a shame because I could easily see this exact same game, but with like just more development time and people on it being even better. But I still enjoyed it in spite of all those criticisms. It's the kind of thing where, if it wasn't already so good, it wouldn't be so frustrating. But because it's not perfect, it's just like, you took it all the way to the 1 yard line and you fumbled the fucker, but whatever.